However, this is not the end of the slaughter. Yeesh. With the help of his elder nurse, he gathers all the maids that were disloyal to his house. The dozen he gathers are forced to clean the hall and move the dead men outside. Afterward, Odysseus instructs Telemachus to kill all the women with the sword, but Telemachus resists. No clean death for the likes of them, by God, not for me. They showered abuse on my head, my mother's too. You sluts, the suitors, whores. End quote. The women are tied up by their necks and hung in mass. Quote, as doves or thrushes beating their spread wings against some snare rigged up in rickets, flying in for a cozy nest, but a grisly bed receives them. So the women's heads were trapped in a line. End quote. Apparently, being hung is worse than death by sword? Oh, and I almost forgot Melanthius, a disloyal goatherd. After being brought to court, they, quote, lopped his nose and ears with a ruthless knife, tore his genitals out for the dogs to eat raw, and in a manic fury hacked off his hands and feet. End quote. Anyone else? Can we call it good now? Pure savagery. The halls are then cleaned and purified with fire and fumes. Odysseus reunites with his beloved Penelope, and then he launches into the tale of his journey home. They embrace and talk through the night. Odysseus then reunites with his father Laertes, who is overjoyed at his son's return. After a family feast, word of the hall slaughter gets out of the city, and families of the deceased take up arms against Odysseus and company. A battle ensues, more men die, and finally Athena steps in the form of Mentor, a friend of Odysseus, and shouts, hold back, you men of Ithaca, back from brutal war. Break off, shed no more blood, make peace at once. End quote. It appears that Odysseus is on the way to victory, but he pulls back at the appeals of Athena. We finish with Athena's pact of peace. Quote, between both sides for all the years to come, the daughter of Zeus, whose shield is storm and thunder. End quote. I guess I'm glad that Odysseus returns home to Ithaca to purge his home of the terrible men, but I'm also a little confused as whether we are really supposed to root for the royal son of Laertes. I mean, he was gone for 20 years and no one even knew of his whereabouts. Most of his homeboys in Ithaca probably thought he was dead from the war or some time after. Can you really blame the suitors for trying to hit on his wife or move into his home? How long is loyalty supposed to last? I get that ancient Greece was a different time and the conventions of the day were a little more binding, but come on, I mean really. Odysseus comes home and just goes overboard. He slaughters everyone and then some. Did he really need to decapitate the priest, hang the maids, or tear off Melanthius' genitals? A little mercy, perhaps. I don't know. In the end, he seemed like a vengeful, somewhat sadistic man. Honor is one thing, but Jesus H. Christ, I think a little Jesus H. Christ might have served him well. In fact, I think that's more of the track we're on here. The ideal man. What does it take and who shall it be? The Odyssey and Iliad both spellbind us with mesmerizing stories centered around the idea of honor and what it means to be an honorable man. The men almost obsess over honor. Both stories, quote unquote, tantalize us with the notion of perfection, but it simply wasn't developed enough yet, at least the way we understand it today. For in these stories, the apex man, the king, the leader, the ruler, wasn't the strongest brute, nor was he the most honest, and definitely not the most compassionate. He was a hybrid of sorts, a proto-sage, a pre-truth seeker, an almost truth purveyor. You see, Odysseus was revered in his time for his guile, his trickery, his foresight. These qualities must have been in short supply at a time filled with brutish Trojans, Achaeans, and the like, competing with sword and shield. Not to discount their intelligence, because it was certainly there, but the development of strategy and intellect was still a work in progress, to say nothing of mercy or compassion. Odysseus was revered for his ability to outsmart others and to get an advantage for himself, for his crew, or for his family. He was also revered for his fighting and his loyalty, but more than anything, for his cunning. These were the qualities that elevated him to the hero of the time. It won't be for another 300 years later that the ideal man takes a great leap in its evolution with Socrates, the man who questions everything and speaks the truth only for the sake of truth, and with a willingness to sacrifice himself on that principle alone. And at least 800 years later, when we see figures like Jesus Christ, who elevated forgiveness and compassion above wrath and vengeance. Odysseus may not be the hero for our time, but surely he was for his. Summary. One of the great stories of all time, the Odyssey is imaginative and profound, not to mention an endless well of topics and themes to explore. Rating 8.0. This review was done on April 18th, 2018. And I apologize for butchering any of the ancient Greek names. And thanks for listening.